Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with a little chat about the foibles and fallibility of your very own favorite music critic. Moi, at least I hope. Recently, someone wrote to me, and they sent to me a couple of links from a pair of ClassicsToday.com reviews saying, which of these two reviews should I believe? Now, at ClassicsToday.com, quite often we actually review the same disc with different critics to get different opinions, because it's interesting, and we all know that different people have different viewpoints of the same thing. The only problem is I wrote both of these reviews, and I had no recollection of writing the reviews. I remember the performances vividly, but the reviews, not a bit, because, it's a problem. The record labels issue and reissue the same stuff. And sometimes they do it within a few years. Sometimes it's decades. Sometimes, for whatever reason, I've reviewed something and then it comes back. I don't know. It came back twice. I reviewed it twice. And I reviewed it from a wholly different perspective the second time around. So the first time I reviewed it, it got a 6. And the second time I reviewed it, it got a 10. And I said to myself, oh God, I've really stuck my foot in it now, because this has happened before. It happened, I have to tell you, it was a horribly embarrassing thing for me, because it was a recording of Beethoven with Herreweghe on pentatone, I believe it was. And, his Beethoven cycle, I think, is really kind of terrible. But the first time I heard one disc in isolation, I liked it. It was before I'd heard lots and lots of Beethoven on period instruments or in period style. And I thought it was sort of a nice blend of, period instrument and modern instruments. It was nice to it. But then lots of that stuff started coming out, and I heard it again. It got re-released, and I just despised it, and I trashed it. I felt totally different about it. I really just had changed my mind. But both of those reviews were up there, and somebody from the orchestra wrote to me and said, well, what about this? And I felt terrible. Not because I didn't think my change of mind was invalid, but because, I'd been nice to them and that I wasn't. And it was a horrible feeling. But, we're only human. And opinions change with time, with knowledge, with experience, with all of those things. I mean, I am not the critic I was 40 years ago, when I started doing this. So all I can say is that's going to happen. And, of course, astute readers such as yourselves love to catch us out. And quite often you do. And we deserve to be, because you're the people who keep us honest. You keep me honest because I know you're watching. And I know you care. And I know you deserve the best work and the most objective and honest opinions I can give. And so it's all okay, But I want to talk about this one example because it was just one of those albums that seems uniquely susceptible to differing viewpoints. It's Václav Smetacek with, I think, the Prague Symphony or one of those. Well, we'll get to who it is. And they were doing 3 works. It was on Superfund. Dvorak Symphony No. 3, Glazanov's Saxophone Concerto, and the Gershwin Rhapsody in Blue, which was in mono with Jan Panenka, I think, was the pianist. Again, we'll get to it. And I wrote 2 reviews. One very brief and dismissive, the other somewhat longer and more thoughtful about other things. I'm going to read them both to you, and then we'll talk about them a little bit. I just think this was really, really funny. So I looked at these 2 reviews, aghast and just horrified and not knowing what I was going to see, because I don't remember anything about writing them. And here is the first one. Pardon me, that's the second one. Let me get the first one up here. Here is the first one, which gave the performances a 6. Okay, here we go. Needless to say, this release is a mixed bag. The Dvorak is quite good. After a slightly soggy opening, Václav Smetacek turns in a terrific central funeral march and one of the best finales on disc. The Glazunov Saxophone Concerto also is well played by both the soloist and the orchestra, but it's a weak work, and its presence isn't going to make a difference to most listeners. And so we come to the Gershwin. I have to confess that I'm a fan of potentially unidiomatic European performances of American music, particularly those originating from behind the old Iron Curtain. But everything has its limits. Jan Panenka handles the solo part respectfully and tastefully, but the conducting has to be some of the stiffest and least alluring in the history of humankind. In these dull, heavy surroundings, the prominent banjo sounds positively embarrassing. You already know if you want this. So there you go. I mean, it was 6 because the Dvorak was great, the Glazunov was irrelevant, and the Gershwin was kind of horrifying. And the coupling was just so strange. I mean, it's just who wants that coupling? I don't know. So there we were. Original review. Then, for reasons I can't even begin to describe, this disc showed up on my doorstep again, and so I listened to it again, and I reviewed it again. And I didn't even remember having written the first review. If I had, I would have consulted it and made sure to be more consistent the second time around, just for the sake of my own sanity and reputation. But I didn't, I wasn't, and I wrote a much more extensive review. So here is the second review, in which I gave the artistic quality a 10. The sound quality, I have to say, was a 6 in both cases. So I was 100% consistent on the sound quality. Thank God. So here is the second review. Recently, I have had many occasions to remark on the difference between a pickup orchestra full of excellent players, such as the Lucerne Festival Orchestra, and an excellent orchestra. The Prague Symphony Orchestra in the 1950s was certainly not one of the world's great aggregations, but it played like a true, regularly constituted ensemble, and so often produced excellent results. One way to hear this is in its ability to play loud, to encompass a huge dynamic range, and ride the climaxes without fear or an excess of caution. They play as if their lives depended on it, and damn it, that's the way it should be. In this smoking hot performance of Dvorak's glorious and shamefully neglected Third Symphony, you will notice this very clearly. Consider the conclusion of the first movement. I have a sound clip in there, by the way. And just imagine how thrilling this must have sounded live. The somewhat primitive stereosonics barely contain the energy. Of course, it helps that Smetacek and the players know the music and the idiom. Their confidence shows at every moment. But this, too, is one of the advantages of working together over time, creating a genuine ensemble. Glazunov's saxophone concerto gets as fine a performance as it probably can take. It's fluff, and that's that. Rhapsody in Blue, although recorded in mono, goes surprisingly well. Jan Panenka has a Czech musician's natural way with rhythm, and his Gershwin flows naturally and compellingly from start to finish. Smetacek's conducting has a few stiff moments, but gets the job done. The rating applies to the symphony, which really is special. Everything else is a bonus. So, what are we to make of this? Well, I will say a few things, a few observations, which I think should clue you in on how to read reviews. First of all, pay attention to what the critic is actually reviewing. I said that the rating in that second review only applies to the symphony. If I'd had to do what I did the first time, which is take a generalized average, it would have come down. It might not have been quite, a 6 the first time around? Maybe it would have been a 7, but it still would have been in that area. No question about that, because my opinion of the Glazunov did not change at all. That was completely consistent. My opinion of the Dvorak was completely consistent. I said it was a really exciting Dvorak. I think in the second review, I'd had a little bit more time to consider different recordings of Dvorak's third in the intervening years, and so maybe I appreciated it a bit more than I originally did. But my basic conception of the performance remained unchanged. Thank God. Now, the Gershwin. Well, the Gershwin, it depends on how you feel on the day. Again, I was pretty consistent with Panenka. I think I said in both cases that he plays well, that it's flowing and nice, and I'm also pretty consistent about Smetacek. On the one hand, I said he's stiff. and he's unyielding. The first time I said it's the most horribly stiff performance in the history of humankind. Okay, I exaggerated for the sake of the point. A little bit of hyperbole is usually part of the critic's arsenal, I would say. So actually, what's more interesting to me, just reading these reviews over again, is how fundamentally the same view of the disc and of the individual performances on the disc produced such different ratings. You have to pay attention to what I was actually reviewing. In one of them, I wanted you to hear that Dvorak Third. I really wanted you to hear that Dvorak Third. It's a wonderful, wonderful Dvorak Third symphony, and it's a wonderful symphony. And I was trying to make a didactic point because I'd heard a lot of performances like with the Abato and Lucerne Festival and all these, supposedly fabulous pickup orchestras that sound to me like pickup orchestras. They're good, but they're not regularly constituted ensembles. So I was trying to make a point, a didactic point in that particular review that I didn't care about the earlier review, where I was listening to just the three performances and averaging out how I felt the rating would go. So I was relieved. I was relieved that the opinions expressed in those two reviews were actually pretty consistent, and kind of depressed that I didn't do my checkup and make sure I hadn't already talked about that recording, so that I could at least not reviewed it again and just let it go, or have been consistent. I think, though, at the end of the day, I am happy that at least I reconsidered it and was able to give it a high rating so that I could recommend that recording of the Dvorak Third. Because it really is a great Dvorak Third. And it's sort of depressing to think that that one great performance, which is the longest and most important thing on the disc, could have been overlooked or ignored simply because of the other approach that I took in that other review. I mean, you all know, you're all very smart, and you tell me this all the time anyway, and you're not in any way shy of letting me know that you disagree with my opinions. So you know that this is all subjective, and you know that you have to trust your own judgment in a lot of places, and you know to read reviews with a grain of salt, including mine. And that's the way it should be, because I think if we learn anything, we learn that you can come up with very different final perceptions of the same disc from the same guy that are both correct in their way. And so, of course, the person who wrote to me said, which of these two reviews should I believe? Rather snarkily. And so I wrote back, both, of course. I had no other answer. But I hope you can, see the issue that I raised, and that, this will at least, give you a taste of what it is, first of all, to be a critic who churns out lots of reviews over a 40-year period, and second of all, how to read them so that you get out of them the information that you need to make informed choices. I mean, that's really the point, isn't it? It's to help you decide what you're going to like or what may appeal to you. And I think that at least I can say in my defense that I was pretty consistent, even if the final rating was completely, totally opposed in these two cases. It was fun. It was fun to see this again. It was educational for me, and it's always humbling. It always reminds us that we are only human. We're only people. It's all opinion. We're all doing the best we can. Sometimes we do, and sometimes we don't. So keep on listening, folks. Thanks for joining me. Take care.